At the 81st Academy Awards in 2009, the film Man on Wire won the Oscar for Best Documentary Feature. It was one of the most acclaimed documentaries of the year, and its accolades were well deserved. Using interviews from the real people who pulled it off, as well as vignettes of recreations of the real event, director James Marsh and his crew expertly crafted a movie telling the incredible story about Philippe Petit's famous high-wire walk between the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in 1974. The film's success also caught the eye of a notorious director, Robert Zemeckis, with an Oscar for directing and numerous cinematic classics under his belt. Zemeckis has the kind of clout in Hollywood where you just kinda get to make whatever movie you want, regardless of whether or not it makes any money back. Following his resurgence into the Oscar race in 2012 with his film Flight, Zemeckis set his eyes on adapting the same biography that Man on Wire was based on into a feature film to tell Petit's story with actors and top-notch visual effects. Starring Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Ben Kingsley, the movie The Walk was released in 2015 to a much wider audience than the documentary it was based on. The film was accurate for the most part. In my personal opinion, I think it's more or less a retelling of the same story as the documentary, and isn't really a necessary adaptation. And it made some money, not a lot, but enough, I guess. Who really even understands Hollywood accounting anyways? Regardless, the disappointing box office returns of this and his next film Ally didn't stop the Zemeckis Express, because in 2017, production was announced for a feature film adaptation of the 2010 documentary Marwencol. From 2006 to 2010, director Jeff Malmberg and his crew documented the tragic story surrounding Mark Hogenkamp, a New York man who was the victim of a brutal hate crime that left him with severe memory loss and PTSD. Mark's life prior to the attack only existed to him through photographs and journals written by him during long drinking binges.
The teenagers kicked my head to pieces. They wiped, everything. All memory of everything.
Following his attack, his alcoholism and other traits disappeared, and through various forms of therapy, he was able to regain a small sense of who he once was. But his main form of therapy was one he created all on his own. Mark spent most of his time creating and photographing a 1/6 scale model of a World War II era Belgian village, which he named Marwencol. The name comes from his name, Mark, and the names of two women who cared for Mark during his recovery period, Wendy and Colleen. Mark's attention to detail and vivid imagination gave way to some immaculate displays and figures. The photos he took showed Marwencol was a town where soldiers either enjoyed drinking and having fun or fighting against Nazis. Naturally, Malmberg's documentary explores how the many aspects of Mark's life weave their ways in and out of the ongoing narrative in the Marwencol village, both good and bad. Mark's story was inspiring to many, and the documentary received acclaim from both viewers and critics. On a personal note, this documentary never fails to make me emotional whenever I watch it. It remains one of my top documentaries because of how powerful it is. But of course, some things just can't be left alone like they should. In 2017, it was announced that Robert Zemeckis' next film would be a dramatized version of Hogenkamp's story starring Steve Carell. Utilizing motion capture, the film would attempt to portray the world of Marwencol by directly placing the actors in the bodies of the dolls Mark created. Given that the film's cast and crew were full of such reputable talent, many assumed this would be the feel-good movie of the 2018 holiday season. However, as we're about to discuss, it wasn't.
Hey guys, this is my review of Welcome to Marwen.
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 So let's get into it.
I walked into this movie very excited.
And so, of course, the performance by Steve Carell was phenomenal. I loved him. He was very convincing.
So the movie begins, and right off the bat, I'm already a little pissed off because I'm still in my car about 6 miles away from the theater. I got pulled over.
I was really underwhelmed with this movie, and I've spent the last few days trying to figure out why that is.
This movie is way too long and it's way too boring. It felt like every single scene just drags.
There's a good movie in Welcome to Marwen somewhere in there. Unfortunately, it's covered up by everything that's dry about it.
And we can go into a whole he said, she said of why exactly I got pulled over, but long story short, I was watching The Tuxedo starring Jackie Chan on my iPhone.
There's no subtlety here, and the way Steve Carell was told to portray Hogenkamp in a happy-go-lucky way feels very jarring.
But as good as the visual effects are, it doesn't make up for an underwhelming story.
But sadly, this movie is riddled with terrible writing and a storyline that is uneven to the point where it loses your interest halfway through.
Every 10 minutes, I was excited, I was intrigued, I wanted to know what happened, and I wanted to know everything. Other moments, I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm ready to go. Like,
I finally get to the theater. It's about 56 minutes into the movie. I'm watching it, and I realize that Jim and Pam aren't even going to be in it at all. Like, not even as the toys.
The writing is just awful. A 5th grader could probably write a better script than this.
At times, Mark comes off as creepy. These dolls symbolize certain characters in his lives, but we never get to explore all of those characters in his life.
It feels like a technical exercise where they established all of the cool scenes that they wanted to film in the fantasy world, but they didn't really flesh out the main story.
So that's my review of Welcome to Marwen. If I had to rate it 1 to 5, I'd say it's not really worth it. So thanks, guys.
Despite the best efforts of the various production companies and Universal's marketing campaign, Welcome to Marwen was a critical and financial flop. In its opening weekend, the movie grossed a disastrous $2.3 million in the box office, against a production budget of $45 million. And considering that the studio spent an additional $60 million to advertise the film, calling the film a flop is almost putting it lightly. Despite Zemeckis' good intentions with bringing this story to a wide audience, the end result was off-putting to many and was largely criticized for its writing and execution. And while there are certain aspects of Hogenkamp's life that this movie got right, the overall negative reaction the film garnered was, unfortunately, well-deserved. We'll get to all the nitty-gritty of why this movie doesn't work, but first, let's talk about the aspects of the story it got right. Don't worry, this part won't take that long. In terms of accuracy, Welcome to Marwen is only about 25% correct in my opinion. While the documentary lays out all the different aspects of Mark's life after the attack in a somewhat linear fashion, this film tries to balance them all at once. There's things like his friendships with various women in his life and his daily activities that are shown in the film, albeit in a way that is exaggerated or only partially true. Mark's walk along the road with his little jeep full of dolls and mini artillery, for example. It also includes the one day of the week that Hogenkamp works at a local restaurant making meatballs as a way to steady his hands and stay active. Additionally, the film shows the art gallery that Mark displayed his works in after encouragement from outside sources. These are all surface level things that only really show a fraction of the real story. In interviews, Zemeckis repeatedly states how moved and inspired he was by the documentary to make this film. But all of his answers seem boilerplate and standard, rehearsed even.
I was watching the documentary, and midway through the documentary, I literally stood up in my living room and watched the rest of it standing. I thought it was such a powerful story, and I thought at that moment that there was a germ of an idea in there that could be expanded into a feature movie.
Again, I don't believe his intentions in wanting to make a dramatized version of Mark's life was necessarily a bad thing. It's just that a story like this requires a sense of nuance and subtlety that isn't found anywhere in Welcome to Marwen. Because of all the glaring changes in the story that compound together in Zemeckis' film, it's hard for me to talk about this movie without talking about what it did wrong. In Marwencol, some of the most powerful moments come from seeing just the still images of the narrative that Mark took as a way to document the events as he saw them. One of the main things that Welcome to Marwen did wrong was to bring this world to life. Of course, that's just my opinion. Part of what makes Marwencol so magical is filling in the gaps of the stories with your imagination. Zemeckis' entire vision for the film was clearly fixated on this though, so the doll sequences take up about half of the film's runtime. As a result, more time and attention seems to be spent watching these scenes of cartoonish violence that are meant to represent thinly veiled metaphors from Mark's real life. But even though Zemeckis' interpretation of the world inside Mark's head was praised by the actual Mark Hogenkamp, this film was still made to appeal to a wide audience of viewers, not just the man himself.
When the trailer came out, he said, "Steve, give me a call, it's Mark." He said, "I've seen it 12 times, I've cried every time. That's it, you captured that world." He was so excited.
I can appreciate that Mark in real life has 2 movies about him now that celebrate his life and his art, but what really bugs me is the sort of cynical way the whole subject matter is treated in Welcome to Marwen. The documentary was a passion project of director Jeff Malmberg, and you can tell he really understood why Mark needed to open up and share his life with the crew filming him.
Mark was ready. He had a lot of ideas he had to work through, but he hadn't talked to anybody about it. So this was a chance to kind of have that conversation. And I quickly realized in shooting, all that shooting was for a really long time was the ability to listen. It wasn't asking questions. It was just listening.
Because Zemeckis' film dedicates so much time to the drama of these dolls, it largely takes away from the emotional appeal of Mark's real-life story. In trying to tell the story of his life, it got lost in his imagination. With the way information is presented in Welcome to Marwen, it almost assumes that the viewer is watching in the context of already having seen the documentary beforehand, which leads to confusion. Before we go any further in trying to understand Mark Hogenkamp as a person, we must first discuss the role that women have had in his life. Mark has stated numerous times that the reason he holds women in such high regard in his village is because primarily, women were instrumental in helping him heal and rehabilitate after his attack. Later on, he even learned that a woman was the first person that found him and called the police following the assault. But to understand Mark's admiration for women, it's important to consider his infatuation with women's shoes. In the documentary, Mark claims to have over 218 pairs of various kinds of women's shoes. In fact, it was the brief mention of this interest that led to his attackers committing the bigoted hate crime against him. Mark considers himself to be straight, but wears the shoes as a way to, in his words, capture the essence of women.
218 pair of women's essence.
In Welcome to Marwen, Mark's cross-dressing is merely treated as more of a quirk than an important aspect of his life. Neither the documentary nor the feature film downplay Mark's infatuation with women themselves either. The documentary has a segment talking about Colleen, Mark's former neighbor after the attack. They were friends that used to talk outside a picket fence that they shared. Mark's crush on Colleen was undeniable and obvious, despite the fact that she was married and had a family. In the village of Marwencol, Mark and Colleen's dolls were even married, which the real Colleen didn't exactly respond positively to.
As he was telling me, it was like he was telling me about it like it was somebody else, like it was two other people. And then when he told me it was us, and I was just like, what? Hello? You're talking to a real person and there's dolls. You have to know when you have to stop.
By watching the documentary, it's obvious that while it may be odd, Mark's misinterpretation of their relationship is essentially a boyish crush caused by damage to his brain's frontal lobe. Relearning social norms is a part of Mark's rehabilitation, but Welcome to Marwen essentially portrays the whole thing as a creepy friend zoning. It's also worth noting that this character's name is Nicole, not Colleen, but her character essentially serves the same purpose in the narrative, so I'm just going to refer to her character as Colleen to simplify things. The filmmakers even went out of their way to have a scene where Mark literally proposes to Colleen, something that never happened in real life. This whole sequence is one of the most inaccurate and embarrassing parts of the whole movie.
I'm so tired of being alone.
It's also worth bringing up that she has this stereotypical douchey evil ex-boyfriend that keeps showing up at the worst moments, and every scene with him is just cringe-inducing.
Was ist los? Achtung, sprechen Sie Deutsch. Finger!
Oh, for God's sake, Kurt, stop it.
In this version, she's also not married and doesn't have a family, so she's just got an evil ex-boyfriend, I guess? Because that's the same thing, right? His character is so one-dimensional that it's kind of just baffling that he's even in the movie. The other women of Marwen seem to be mostly independent from their real-life counterparts in Zemeckis' film, one of whom is a caretaker of Mark's with a horrible Russian accent.
30 seconds, no more than 1 minute when you get anxiety, huh?
If there's a real-life counterpart for this person, I've failed to find her in the whole documentary. I understand the narrative purpose of giving each woman in Marwen a clear counterpart in Mark's life, but it just seems so unnecessary when they interact with the real Mark only once or twice. So let's talk about the Nazis. In the real Marwencol, Nazis represented the antagonists in Mark's life, including his attackers, because they fit the period and themes of the 1940s Belgian village that Mark created. Nazis were simply used as a way to convey evil itself, and how Mark was able to funnel his anger through the violence in Marwencol. Welcome to Marwen takes it way too far and makes Mark's real-life attackers literal neo-Nazis. The only reason I can think of that Zemeckis took this angle was to possibly make a statement on the evils of white supremacy and neo-Nazis in modern America. Or just a visual metaphor, I guess? I'm not really sure, but I can confidently say that every scene where Steve Carell has a PTSD-fueled breakdown because he sees a Nazi seems highly exaggerated and wrong. Mark Hogenkamp certainly was angry at his attackers and states that seeing a Nazi doll was a perfect reflection of the evils of his life in one face. Framing his attackers as actual Nazis is a huge misrepresentation of real life. And if Robert Zemeckis really cared enough to treat the story with some subtlety, then we wouldn't end up with scenes like this.
Well, bring them Frenchy tartars over here, baby. I got something for you to pull.
And while I understand that Welcome to Marwen is considered a Hollywood version of events, its execution is just baffling and not to mention uncreative. Speaking of being uncreative, they also have an Oscar baity love interest, who is the woman who works at the doll store in town where Mark buys all of his supplies. The real craft store owner was an elderly married woman, so I'm not really sure why they needed to change her to a cute girl that Mark asks out at the end of the movie, other than to represent how he actually was able to start dating again in real life. Another main antagonist in Welcome to Marwen is Deja Thoris, the Belgian witch of Marwen that seems to control Mark's mindset at all times. This is one of the largest problems in the movie. In real life, Mark had complete control over everything that happened in Marwencol, including how the in-universe characters act and behave. Like I've said before, real-life events can influence things that happen in the village, like when Deja just vanishes Colleen after her real-life rejection of Mark. But Zemeckis' film portrays her as a bad influence on Mark's life, which doesn't really make any sense. It goes so far that even at the end, she's revealed to be a Nazi too? Really? Also, quick side note, did the time machine really have to resemble the DeLorean? Seriously? Come on. The pacing of Welcome to Marwen is also a key factor in why it's so hard to watch. Scenes go on, especially when it's the dolls interacting in their world. The doll scenes often interrupt key moments of the dramatic scenes in the real world, and it diminishes any emotional weight the scenes had going. I understand why Zemeckis chose to portray the village in this way, but it really throws off the balance of everything in the movie. If these sequences had just taken up maybe 10 minutes of the movie, it would have worked a lot better, but they constantly interrupt what's going on. The more emotionally gripping and heavy stuff is in Mark's real-life story, so it's painful to sit through these scenes of dolls just talking and shooting at each other when we just don't care. Seeing a still photograph is enough, honestly. Speaking of things not being balanced, the tone is pretty inconsistent throughout the movie. The doll sequences flux between comedic and witty to straight up dark and dramatic in the same scene.
Does she have a cow?
Got caught in the crossfire. Cow lateral damage.
She's losing a lot of blood.
Captain, merci. Merci.
The intention is there, but the execution really ruins things. Mark himself is portrayed as this creepy stalker pervert guy. They even gave Colleen's ex-boyfriend this line.
Some kind of white supremacist pedophile,
Stop it.
Mark? Huh?
Such a jerk.
Yikes.
I can't imagine what Mark's reaction was to seeing how he was portrayed by Steve Carell in the movie, but I feel that his character as a person was just misrepresented unfairly. And I can't think of any reason why it was handled so poorly, other than the tone deafness of Zemeckis' script and directing. Robert Zemeckis has been making films in Hollywood for over 4 decades now, so at this point he just kind of seems like he's on autopilot. And I don't want to dislike this movie and the choices he made as much as I do, when he's directed tons of movies that I love in the past. But people change as they grow older, and when you just keep making movies to try and further technology, you can get lost in what you're trying to accomplish. The closest thing I can think of to compare this movie's production to is the Star Wars prequels. George Lucas's fascination with visual effects distracted him from making a compelling narrative, instead choosing to rely heavily on computer-generated effects and sets. It's widely understood that a large part of what went wrong with the prequels was not enough people were around to turn down any of Lucas's ideas, leading to films that are tone-deaf with state-of-the-art effects. Welcome to Marwen is the 3rd time that Zemeckis has utilized motion capture in a film, and he clearly loves using it. But it seems like at no point was there any one person that said, just maybe putting a real person's face onto a doll is kinda creepy. Toy Story was able to convince you that Woody was both a toy and had a personality all through his face back in 1995. Welcome to Marwen wants to seem like it's a step forward in technology and storytelling, when it really just feels like 2 steps back. It's a calculated Hollywood product that attempted to capitalize on emotion and empathy to make a profit, something it failed to do, by the way. and in the process, it completely ruined the core of the inspiring true story it wanted to tell.
When I step on the set on the first day, I have no idea what I'm going to do.
Really?
Yeah.
Just wing it. You just wing it.
Oh, okay.
You're pulling the curtain back. You
Oh,
can't
that's
do
right. I
that.
can't do that. Oh, right. Exactly.
No,
well, all you
everyone-
do is start pointing.
In conclusion, I'd just like to ask Robert Zemeckis to stop adapting real stories that he saw award-winning documentaries about into big-budget movies. Your intentions may be in the right place, but it's just not worth retelling these stories when the documentaries already do an excellent job. I hope that whatever's next for him as a director is something that he treats as well as movies like Forrest Gump or Flight. Focus on the people in your stories, not the toys you can play with to tell the stories. And if it really makes a difference, bring on someone else to write your movies with you that can bring some actual nuance to the scripts. I wanted Welcome to Marwen to be a feel-good movie that paid tribute to a brave and inspiring man, but ultimately it was just a disappointment. Of course, I'm just one guy with an opinion, but I'm certainly not alone in that opinion. Mark Hogenkamp reportedly is living happily with a girlfriend and has been spending less time on Marwencol than he did when the documentary was being filmed. And I hope he has a happy rest of his life. I truly do. All we can really do at this point is add Welcome to Marwen to the long list of things that could have been great. My name's Greg Phipps. Thank you for watching.